All right, here we are. Let me know when you guys can hear me. Okay, both in the Moore's Law's Dead Discord, which you get access to if you support us on Patreon for just $2 a month. Then also, of course, in the live chat on YouTube. Do, do, do. As always, there is that awkward 10-second delay where I'm waiting to see if you guys answer me. Still, no answers. There we go. There's, of course, just a natural delay, so I'm always just sitting here waiting like, "Oh god, am I gonna have to start this over?" But, yeah. Anyways, here we go. Welcome to the end of February loose ends. This is where, at the end of every month, either around the last week of the month or in the first week of the next month, I try to answer anything and everything you all have to ask me because I have nothing to hide. And remember, if you support Moore's Laws on Patreon, you can ask questions for free ahead of time that I then prepare my thoughts for before the live stream. And actually, as has been the case, and I believe like every live stream, basically every piece of content from Moore's Law is Dead for the past like year. There's just the network of people I talk to at this point is big enough where there's usually something new I can say anytime I do anything. And so today is no different. I actually just want to open up with some new Nintendo Switch details that I'm really excited to talk about. And remember, if you want to ask a question, make sure you submit a tipped question so it stays and gets logged, and then I can get to it later in the live stream. But don't hesitate because I only do this for like 1 to 2 hours, and I start putting to the side all the questions popping up in the live chat, or sometimes even in the Moore's Law at Discord right now, and I get to them as I work through the subjects that I've outlined. But let me put down the timestamp now here. Again, though, don't hesitate. Put in those questions now in the live chat if you have them. And the Switch 2. So, yeah. All right. So, of course, the last video I put out 2 days ago was about the Nintendo Switch 2, where I basically confirmed that really the stuff that had been leaked from that Nvidia hack years ago still holds true, which for me was what got me into putting that video together. I kind of heard what the specs were. Of course, other people had been talking about those leaks for years. And I was like, well, 8 nanometer. I mean, this leak is from 2022. I mean, can this still be true? Especially if these rumors coming out right now are even remotely credible that the Switch 2 might not launch until 2025. And yeah, what made me make that video is hearing, indeed, it is still true. And Nintendo is just waiting to release the Switch 2. They aren't rushed. They're just polishing games, trying to sell through the existing Switch. And for them, the way I see, I think all too often people say performance doesn't matter to Nintendo. It's more so they have a performance goal in mind that they plan to have last for, 6 to 10 years with a console. And as long as it hits those goals, they're done. Like they assume that their first party games will be enough, and they built a certain level of performance for those first party games. And they assume if they nail the device, that third parties will make their games work on it, even if it's a little underpowered. But I think that's been very confusing to some people because I think some people, I noticed this in the comments section of that Nintendo Switch video. A lot of people were like, well, then they have to do this, they have to do that. There's no way it could be using 8 nanometer. And I think a lot of people are forgetting they have a certain price threshold, a certain performance threshold to meet the requirements they want. Once they have that, they're good to go. And if they launch a year late, whatever, the games will be more polished. It's not to say they don't care about performance. They do. They just don't see it as a net sum loss if they launch later, like Sony would, where they're like, well, we're launching a year later, so we have to overclock it more or something. I don't think that's how Nintendo looks at it, but it's not the same as saying they don't care about performance. They do. And I do believe they care about performance more this generation than they cared about it last generation, which gets me to the new information. So I'm just going to go right down the list right here. There will be a timestamp for people who, of course, watch this later. But I am told now directly by multiple people that yes, indeed, the Switch 2 uses 8 nanometer. And this is something that I've seen. I said in that video, but I would, if you'd have asked me a few days ago, I would have said I'm not 100% sure. I am now. It uses 8 nanometer. And I've seen weird arguments online about how this isn't possible. And all I can tell you is I don't agree with your data or performance curves that suggest it's not. It is possible. It is working. If you disagree, it's not a matter of understanding something, then you need to go drive to Nvidia and say, Jensen, I'm smarter than you because you apparently think something's not possible that they do. So it's 8 nanometer and it is hitting the performance targets they wanted to hit. And overall, you should expect its performance, which is coming out of an SoC that at the minimum, I am told, it has a lot less transistors than the Series S, but it is comparable or a bit better than the Steam Deck. Like the graphics IP block, right? It's monolithic. It's not like a GPU. The GPU portion of the APU in the Switch 2 is stronger than the Steam Deck, at least in raw performance. Obviously, it will vary in performance whether it's docked or not. I'm talking about in docked performance, it's quite a bit stronger, or can be stronger than the Steam Deck. I want to be careful how I say that because people will split hairs over this, I know. And here's some more interesting details about it, though. Number one, there was a 5 nanometer variant, TSMC 5 nanometer. I'm directly told they never considered the smaller Samsung nodes because, and I quote, they're a dumpster fire. I don't know where people get this idea that like Samsung's cutting edge nodes work, but they don't unless you're using a tiny smartphone SoC and willing to take a loss on every chip sold or something. But they're not good for making tens of millions of consoles a year unless you're using 8 nanometer, which I am hearing Samsung 8 nanometer, especially at reasonable die sizes, has very good yields right now. And so that's going to work for Nintendo. But they did consider other variants. The other variants could have used other architectures, but none of them would have been that much stronger. I think that's another big misconception here, is that people think if they went to TSMC 5 nanometer, it would have just been the same, 1536 CUDA cores that I leaked, and other people, of course, well, the hack leaked years ago, and that would have been clocked faster on TSMC. Wrong. What they would have done is gone with like 1024 CUDA cores and clocked them faster than on Samsung. So the performance threshold is what they wanted. The second they hit it, they're done. They don't want to pay any extra. That is how Nintendo operates. They do care about performance, but once they hit their minimum threshold, they don't care about the extra. Again, it's very important to understand with people arguing they should have used TSMC. If they would have used TSMC, it would have used less CUDA cores clocked faster. It wouldn't have just been better. All right. Anyways, though, another interesting tidbit that I've heard about the Switch 2 is that apparently the reason Nvidia won the contract against AMD is because what Nintendo wanted in handheld mode, AMD couldn't quite deliver. So, at least not for the price that Nintendo wanted to pay on a cheap node like Samsung 8 nanometer or something. So, like, if they would have gone with AMD, they would have basically had to have gone with probably TSMC 6 nanometer or smaller, which is a more expensive node. And although I'm told the AMD version of the Switch 2, outperformed the Nvidia version when it was docked at 30 watts or whatever it ends up being clocked to, uh, it apparently in handheld mode just couldn't deliver the exact level of performance they wanted unless they used one of the most advanced nodes, which they wouldn't want to do because it costs too much. And anyways, getting to the actual specs, I guess the only other updates I have to add are I am being told that it is likely it's at the upper. Yeah, I have to be careful because again, people split hairs over console leaks, but I am told it's probably not a worst case scenario. That one of the design targets for the Switch 2 was decent image quality outputting in 4K. Now, what does that mean? We have to be careful here. Am I saying it's a console that runs native 4K? And no. What I'm saying is they want to output an image at 4K on a big screen in docked mode, and it can't look like complete crap, right? It can't. So that means that if you read between the lines, I would suggest what they wanted is something that's just powerful enough in 4K with like ultra performance mode at 30 frames per second. Now that sounds crazy, but that's not that much performance required. I mean, we're so used to gaming at 60 or 120 hertz right now. I have links in the description. Like you can see an RTX 3050 running Cyberpunk in 4K above like around I forgot what it was at, like 40 frames per second or 60 frames per second if you use DLSS balanced mode with like low or medium settings. Like, so already a 3050, which is probably about double the performance, a desktop 3050 was probably about double, maybe a bit over double the performance of what's going to be in the Switch 2, depending on what the final clock speeds are. If that can do something with aggressive DLSS in Cyberpunk with like medium settings and get near 4K 60, which remember, with aggressive DLSS in 4K, the base resolution is actually just 1080p. So it's not, or even ultra performance mode is 720p. So it's not like I'm saying anything crazy here. If the 3050 could do 4K 60, that means the Switch could do 4K 30. It's not real 4K, but again, that's the goal Nintendo was looking for. And it kind of sounds like they are going to push it at least enough to, at least in their mind, for their first party games, do that. So you don't have a grainy image on a 4K TV. That's what they're trying to avoid. And again, I'm hearing the fully enabled CUDA cores, so 1,536 CUDA cores is likely. If it is cut down, barely cut down. And 12 gigabytes of RAM is likely, 8 gigabytes minimum. Again, but I think 12 is likely. What all of that means is if they were able to get to like with a full die to 1.3 gigahertz, they could hit 4 teraflops, which I think would be a good move, because if they did, they could advertise it as the same teraflops as the Series S, even though we all know that an Ampere teraflop is not the same as an RDNA 2 teraflop, but they could at least advertise it. And I think at a minimum, you should expect this thing to have 3. If I was hedging, if I was hedging, I would say at a minimum, you should expect, because if that would be at 1.3 gigahertz and I clock it down, 3, I think it will be somewhere between like 3 to 4 teraflops in docked mode. And with DLSS and optimization, I think that is just about enough to kind of make it feel like a current gen console in docked mode. And then from what I'm hearing, they're going to much more aggressively clock down the clock speeds, the GPU clock speeds, when it goes into undocked mode. And I think that kind of makes sense. Like if you could pull off, you know, 4K 30 with ultra aggressive DLSS, so again, the base resolution is really like 720p or 1080p, like then that means in undocked mode, you're now probably going from that to like base 720p with like DLSS high performance, or maybe 1080p with balanced DLSS. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at like a fourth the pixels or something that you're going to have to be powering. And if you do that, I don't see why you can't run at half the clock speed. And so I guess that's something that I think is actually kind of interesting here is, look, I'm not saying it's as strong as the Series S. I always said pie in the sky. It would be close, not the same. And I said it could be as weak as the Steam Deck, somewhere in the middle there. But I think it's going to be in the top half of those estimates. And I think that they're going to just be able to pull off something that really does feel a lot better than the previous Switch, where, it's not doing 1440p 60 like a Series X, unfortunately, of course, when it's docked. But maybe it can pull off 4K with the aggressive DLSS 40 hertz VRR mode. And then in handheld mode, I'm hearing that they put a much bigger emphasis on battery life. So I think what they want it to do is they want it to feel like a Steam Deck on the go, but without a 2-hour battery life, like a 4-hour or something. And then when you're docked, no, it's not as good as a PS5 or Series X, but maybe it doesn't feel worse than a Series S, except for the frame rate, which that gets me to the one bad thing here that I do have to say is, and anyone looking at the specs of Orin could tell you this. From what I'm hearing, the one big weakness will be the CPU. I mean, it is definitely weaker than you would ideally want it to be. It sounds to me like you could probably compare it to like the Xbox One X, which, yeah, that's a last gen console. I actually pushed a lot on this one and looked at it, and the way I would frame the Steam Deck, I'm not the Steam Decks, I keep doing that in my head. The Switch 2's likely performance with the CPU is, in single threading, definitely weaker than the Steam Deck, but if you well optimized it multi-threading, comparable to the Steam Deck. What does that mean? Well, that means that because the single threading performance is worse than the Steam Deck, and of course, therefore, worse than the PS5 and Series X, actually a lot worse than the PS5 and Series X single threading, that means that you're not going to do 60 hertz that easily. I think there will be some games that do, but if you really optimize it well, it has enough cores enabled that it can probably run a game a Steam Deck can most of the time. It's just if the Steam Deck right? The Steam Deck allows a lot of customization. If a Steam Deck is saying, hey, if you turn down the resolution, it might look blurry, but you could do 60 hertz when you plug it in, or 40 hertz VRR, that's a big selling point of the Steam Deck. A compromise I do think will be here with the Switch 2 is it'll be much less likely to hit 60 hertz in the same games. It might run at the same, it might run at a higher resolution actually than the Steam Deck, and it might have better effects, better ray tracing, yada yada yada. It might have a notably better image quality than the Steam Deck. But if the Steam Deck, let's say the Steam Deck targets, I guess it's 800p, but like whatever. It targets basically 720p low at 40 to 60 hertz. I would say the Switch 2 is more so going, with like low settings, is going to target like high settings and 1080p, 40, 30, something like that, or like even maybe 1440p, like 30 with DLSS quality turned on, like that type of an image quality. But again, usually 30 hertz. The CPU really is pretty weak for this device, especially when you consider, I would say an RDNA 2 teraflop is, or how do I put, yeah, is like maybe 30% better or more, like 30 to 50, 20 to 50% better than an Ampere teraflop, right? Um, okay, so that means that at 4 teraflops, though, you're still looking at something that's, easily 50% probably better than the Steam Deck. Or even if they cheap out on the clock speeds and cooling here, I would still say it's about 20-30% faster than the Steam Deck's GPU. But the CPU is a bit weaker for gaming. So again, if the Steam Deck is doing 720p low at 40, I think this will do like 720p high with light RT at 30, which if they can deliver that in a 5-watt handheld, again, not when it's docked, more than that, but let's say between 5 to 8 watts in handheld mode with a better battery than the Switch had, well, then I think they might be able to deliver something that weighs less than the Steam Deck with better image quality and maybe a substantially longer battery life. And I think that will be competitive. But again, a lot of this still hinges on it getting 12 gigabytes of RAM. And I'm excited to hear that if they do that, they are pushing this just hard enough where I'm trying to think of what games won't run on it. Like, I don't I think most games will be able to run on it then, like that are AAA for the next 5 years. And that is not the case with the Steam Deck, where you had to like really cut that stuff down. You know what? Like in Hogwarts Legacy, every time your character farts, you have a 2-minute loading screen on the Switch or something, and it looks like a Game Boy game. What I think's exciting this time with the Switch 2 is that hopefully, it sounds like maybe Nintendo realizes that if you're gonna make it a premium device compared to the Switch, then premium means it has to run third-party games 99% of the time at reasonable settings, because otherwise, how is it better than the Switch, right? Like you can't make something selling point that it is a premium version, and if it doesn't always run every game, because then you might as well still just get a Switch, because then you're still just getting it to play Mario or something. But so yeah, again, just to summarize what I'm saying, it is 8 nanometer. Nintendo does seem to not be entirely cheaping out on it, although do expect its handheld mode to be substantially weaker than its docked mode, but maybe still in the ballpark of Steam Deck performance. But again, in the ballpark of its performance, not the same performance, probably a bit lower frame rate, bit higher quality settings, maybe. And again, I think that's very exciting for the Switch 2. So, all right, that's obviously the big leak in this one. Let me see. We make sure I start looking at these tipped questions here. All right, so I saw that there was one from Eric Winberg. Thank you for the tip. You just said thanks, Tom. So I will move on, but thank you there. And then we have an Intel question, a lot of Blackwell questions. Um, Let me see. Yes. Well, we have one Switch question here. Mexi Man and Cheese says leakers are going to say Moore's Law is dead. Confirm Switch to a 4K native. No, you're not doing 4K native 120 hertz. And if you see any website try to quote me saying that, that is not what I said. They often like to really run with what I said to the point that it's just not what I said. All right. Now let me move on to the next subject here. Make sure I have that timestamp down, because a lot of people that watch this after are going to want to see that. and move on to an AMD subject that I have to get to. Oh, and also please hit the like button, everybody. I mean, there's almost 1,000 of you watching. Let's get to 1,000 likes, please, and double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. It does genuinely help the algorithm. It does genuinely help me negotiate with sponsors for better, less intrusive deals. I can say, hey guys, I've got this many subscribers. I'm not running an ad in the first minute. So, like, sorry, it's got to have to be at a like more subscribers does help the channel. Double check that you're subscribed as well. And then, all right, XTX999 writes in and asks, any reports on how well or bad this 7900 GRE is selling? Will the 7800 XT prices drop because of it? Well, XTX 999, before starting this live stream, 10 minutes, 15 minutes late, but I wanted to double check some things. From what I saw, the 7800 XT, at least on Newegg in the United States, isn't continuing to go down in price. So I don't know. Could the GRE push down the 7800 XT long term? Maybe a little. Like I could see the 7800 XT stabilizing closer to 450 to 480, 7900 GRE between 500 to 550, kind of replacing where the 7800 XT is. I have heard some contacts of mine suggest that the 7900 GRE is kind of being released as a potential replacement for where the 7800 XT is now. Again, because for the past like 5 months, the 7800 XT is generally sold above MSRP. It's recent that it's dropped below it. It's usually been sold out at like $520. And I think what AMD is doing with the 7900 GRE is honestly kind of similar to what Nvidia did with the Super, where it doesn't cost that much more to make than the 7800 XT. And if they feel they need to, they can push out enough of those long term to be at 520 with like 5 to 10% more performance and look more favorable compared to a $500 4070 and maybe sub $600 4070 Super if those prices continue to go down here and there. So, yeah, will it maybe push down the prices a bit because of it? Maybe, but right now it isn't yet. They're both still selling well. And actually, that just gets me to the thing I wanted to talk about, which is I don't think it warranted its own video, but I do want to briefly talk about GRE sales, which is to say, number one, they're pretty good so far. I don't know yet that they are good enough to justify AMD dumping a ton of GREs into the market, though. It doesn't seem sold out everywhere. It just seems to be selling out in some markets, but the stock I've been told is insanely limited. So I think it's doing well, but I'm not convinced yet it's doing well enough to be something AMD pushes super hard right now. But I don't think they're going to stop making it because it has gotten good reviews and is selling well. And that's something that's been hard to get this generation, really, if you're being honest, right? Like AMD knows people will go and Google 7900 GRE and see a bunch of good reviews. And because of that, I'm sure they'll keep supplying them because they'll keep selling through. And again, I hear they are selling well. The one thing I will warn, which is a major reason I wanted to talk about it in this episode here is I've heard that the price could go up in the next shipment of them. That like the first shipment was mostly $549, at least in the United States. And don't be surprised if some of the models dropping in like 2 to 3 weeks from now are 600 to 650. What does that mean? What that means is if you are on the fence but leaning towards getting one and you see it in stock at 549 and it's a model that overclocks or will overclock well because AMD is going to unlock that more soon, I would get that now and not wait a month. If you wait a month, the price may go up a bit because I still don't think there's a lot of them out there. And I get the suspicion that AIB has met the MSRP at launch, but after that, they want to milk it a little bit because of the good reviews. Now, if you don't really want it anytime soon, like let's say you're like, who knows, maybe I'll get it in 6 months. Well, then there's no reason to rush out and buy it. Most PC components go down slightly in price over time. It's just if you were thinking, I'm going to get this for sure in the next week or two, I'd get it now because it could go up in price on average a little bit over the next month from what I'm hearing. And I dropped my pencil, which is important to write down timestamps so people don't get mad at me. Dig Wiggler writes in and says, do you think AMD gimped the 7900 GRE too much? How much performance could it have gained with the 7900 XT power limit, which was 320 watts, I believe, and an unrestricted memory overclock? Well, I think people fundamentally misunderstand the entire point of the GRE here, or the original point. The original point of the 7900 GRE was to get rid of excess 7900 XT stock from launch. legitimately. When RDNA 3 launched, when Navi 31 launched at the end of 2022, which we're in 2024 now, they made a ton of 7900 XTs, even some that probably could have been XTXs, I'm told. And it's because, I shit you not, AMD thought people thought the 7900 XT would be great at $900. This has been backed up by Hardware Unboxed, who said this is what reps at AMD told him, is that they were super excited and surprised when he said this thing sucks compared to the XTX. So AMD overproduced the XT. They had all this stuff sitting around in China, and well, do you want to launch? How do you get rid of it, right? Well, what you do is you only release it in China, so you never have to ship the 7900 XT overseas. That right there is going to save you 10, 20 bucks on shipping, making you be able to achieve a cheaper MSRP in China. And then you just use dummy memory dies that you're going to throw out anyways. You use the cheapest GDDR6, so you say unrestricted memory overclock. The reason it has 18 gigabit per second memory, so AIBs can easily source GDDR6 for it no matter what. They don't have to buy the fastest GDR6 on the market. They can buy some cheaper stuff. That's why they did that. That's why it has the lower memory overclocks. That's why its TDP is limited. So it can use 7800 XT boards without basically any modification. That's why it was only launched in China first, to save on shipping costs. That's how they made a card they wanted to sell for 900, get to 650. Remove money from RAM, remove money from board costs, remove money from cooling, remove the prospect of having a shipping cost. 650 is how they got there back in the day. Since then, TSMC is charging a bit less for their wafers. Since then, RAM prices have gone down from 2022 compared to now. And so they can kind of stomach selling it for 550. That's the truth of the matter. But you have to remember that if they were to design the GRE now, it would probably have different base specs to what it had 2 years ago when it was just a different market. So just keep all of that in mind before I answer your question here, Dig Wiggler. But do I think AMD gimped it too much? I think it was always a silly, weird product that was only made for a really specific reason. And that's why that was like that. If your question is, could it have gained more power? Yeah. I mean, if they ran this at like 2.6 gigahertz stock, kind of like what else I think the 7600 XT basically does in game clocks, like if they could get it to 2.6 gigahertz stock and give it 20 gigabit per second memory, which would be an over 10%, that'd be an over 10% bandwidth increase. Yeah, I mean, I think they could have gotten this thing to perform only 10% worse than a 7900 XT. But if they would have done that and required 7900 XT coolers, 7900 XT boards, more expensive RAM, it would have been like a $700 card, $750 card in 2022. There's just no place for that in the market. They didn't need a $750 Navi 31 product in 2023. What they needed was a bare bones $650 card and to drop the price of the 7900 XT, which is what they did. But now the market has changed. Hence, now you get all these better cooled, better versions coming to the US and Europe of the called the GRE, although they're practically different cards with how much faster they clock than the reference models, right? I mean, all right. Now, before I get to some more details, and I do have some new stuff to say about the i9-14900KS and the RTX 5090 in performance, I do want to get to the sponsor. This piece of content is brought to you by Micro Center. Guys, if you want to buy new RTX Super GPUs, 7900 GREs, of course, something like a 7600 XT, which I hear is selling well overall, by the way, and an RTX or RTX 3060, Micro Center is the best place to do it. They have the best prices. They have insane add-on deals, like $25 off any build you submit with pictures. Just buy something from Micro Center, put it in your PC, send them a picture. They'll give you $25 off your next purchase. And on top of that, that stacks with other things. So if you build a PC that comes with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 for free, and the $50 off motherboard thing that you usually get building a PC there, you can just get that $25 off coupon in the description here on top of all that. It all stacks. Additionally, they really want me to insist that I remind you that they have a store opening up in North Carolina right now. Like it's opening up. They want to have a big opening, and they'll give you a free 128 gigabyte flash drive if you just walk in the store. You don't even need to be a new customer. Walk in the new store in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they will give you a free flash drive. And additionally, mark your calendars. March 4th is what they're calling Monitor Madness Month. And I double checked when it all starts, but they're going to have huge discounts on monitors at Micro Center starting March 4th. And I did ask if I could tell you before it happens. I can. It's just expect all those deals to show up. I saw an Acer OLED high refresh rate monitor going for like $870 or something soon. They're going to have 10% or more discounts on tons of monitors, including OLED monitors for hundreds of dollars less than $1,000. Mark your calendars. March 4th is the start of what did they call Monitor Madness Month at Micro Center. And I did legitimately see some good deals there. So, anyways, remember, clicking on all those links in the description helps the channel. Going to Micro Center and using those deals and the links helps the channel even more. And they've been a great sponsor to us. So check out their new Charlotte store and Monitor Madness Month at Micro Center this month. All right, let us move on to a new subject here. And we're going to start with some Intel stuff because that is in the title as well. Let's see. I have 3033 i9-14900KS. All right. So the i9-14900KS, I have a few things to say about it. Number one, I cannot confirm with any additional sources yet that they will do official deleting support for the warranty or something. This came from a good source. It's something I know Intel at least is considering doing, but I can't say I can double down on that right now. So just keep that as something that might be possible, but don't assume it will happen yet. However, I can now confirm the mid-March release, which is interesting because as recent as about a week ago, there were a lot of contacts that would usually know that still seem to think the i9-14900KS was kind of oddly far away. And all of this seems to be because it's going to be extremely low volume. Like I was told by a contact this week that the i9-14900KS is directly just a publicity stunt. So in the middle of March, expect a bunch of like overclocking teams to all of a sudden have i9-14900KSs to try to break new world records, to talk about how crazy it is, how their lives have changed going from 6 to 6.2 gigahertz. That's what this is about, and it is happening in the middle of March. It's mostly a publicity stunt. It's very low volume. That's I don't find the product that interesting, but I just thought I would confirm that you should see those reviews coming in 2 weeks and a ton of publicity overclocking things around it. And I'll keep you updated if I hear any other crazy things about overclocking. Which on the whole deleting thing, if they were to actually support that in warranty, I don't think it would be stupid because I don't think they're making almost any of these things, right? Like if you're only going to make 10,000 of them total, like probably only a fifth of the people who buy it would delete it. But those people who did probably bought it because you're supporting it. And if it breaks, how much does it cost to replace? Really, Intel, for this publicity stunt? I don't know. I think it's an interesting idea. All right, let me move on to this tipped question here. Mexi Man and Cheese writes, and again, it says, what do you think is the problem with Intel? Is it their culture, the leadership, not enough talented engineers? I wouldn't say that. I mean, at this point, because Intel's a huge company that's going through a ton of cultural changes over the past few years. So my answer a few years ago might have been different than now, but I think the problem with Intel is they've mostly worked out a lot of their structural stuff. They've got a lot of talented engineers. I think the biggest problem with Intel right now is probably a combination of they are just kind of running out of money, and the people that you would have wanted to keep to work at AXG for sure just left for like Nvidia to get paid twice as much and be in a division they know isn't possibly going to be axed, right? Like if you were one of the star engineers at Intel Arc, why would you stay at Intel? Nvidia is full of money. They're hiring like crazy, and you know you're not going to get fired at Nvidia if you do a good job. So you would go to Nvidia, maybe even Apple. Apple pays crazy well, I've heard. And I think that's the biggest issue Intel still faces right now is they're still low on money, and yet they haven't solved their problems. So I think the problem is going to be figuring out what they're going to have to sell off. And I can't help but point out that recently Intel, what is it, this week, like basically said they almost said they might sell off some of their fabs. It was weird. Like the way they talked about their fabs being a separate company, and like, yes, the reason you would do that is to bring in more contracts, but I still don't really hear Like everyone's going, oh shit, I got to stop using TSMC. I better go to Intel's fabs now. I can't help but think that go back and read old articles about when Global Foundries started being spun off from AMD and became separate for a few years, restructured, and then was spun off. The way Intel's talking about fabs is scarily similar in its wording. I'm not saying they're going to sell their fabs, nor all of them if they did, but you could see a situation where if Intel needs more money, I don't know anyone who wants to buy AXG. They've already axed Optane and all this other shit. The only thing they really have left to do, in my opinion, is sell off some of their older fabs, which from what I've heard this week, TSMC tends to keep some of their old fabs around for a long time, like 28 nanometer and so on. Like they don't decommission them. They might get rid of 20 nanometer to some extent, but like every like 3 nodes at TSMC, they're like, okay, 28 nanometer. Okay, 16 nanometer maybe, or probably 12 now or something. And then they would go probably 6 nanometer. These are nodes we're going to keep scaling up even while we're on 3 nanometer. We're going to keep 6 nanometer there for those customers long term. Intel usually gets rid of a lot of their older fabs. They're starting to stop that, but it wouldn't surprise me if some of their oldest fabs they were going to decommission or something, or even maybe some of their more recent ones, like what is it, their Intel 16 or whatever they call it. It wouldn't surprise me if they sold off some of those fabs. That's all I'm saying. Not now, but in the future. And I think that's all having to do with this question Mexi Man and Cheese asked me, which is just what is their problem? I think their culture is getting better. I think that they might still have a bit of mid management, especially in their marketing teams to fix. But their biggest issue right now is I basically hear they're running out of money and they've run out of things to kill off. And so I just wonder if they're gonna have to sell some of their fabs. Not saying they will, but the way they're talking, go read those articles with AMD and Global Foundries from like 20 years ago. Go read them. Go read them, people. All right. Now let me move on to more graphics stuff. So let me see. Let me change this here because I also said I would talk about the RTX 5090 in the title. And this will be a brief one, but it's one of those things that I think people could have missed. But in my recent Nintendo Switch 2 leak, I said Blackwell's in validation now, like the 5090 is being validated. And so, assuming things go well, it will be done being validated over the next few months, and then it will be ready to launch. I mean, I think it will be ready to launch by fall. Does that mean I'm sure the gaming version will? Not sure, but again, all of this plays into. I keep seeing these clickbait rumors like Blackwell not ready, 4090 Ti from the usual suspects that make up stuff every day for clicks. Blackwell is totally on track. It can totally launch this year if they want to, and the mobile variants will launch Q1 next year. So I really do believe the 5090 is going to be ready to at least paper launch in Q4, if not Q3. And at a minimum, I would expect Nvidia to do that as a publicity stunt to just crush all arguments that they aren't in charge by large margins in performance and gaming. So that's what I see happening. And I've seen a lot of people in the comments say that it will be crazy if the 5090 is like 40 to 70% stronger than the 4090. Oh, it will be. I mean, in fact, I would say it's going to be 50 to 70% faster, most likely. And yeah, that's going to crush 4K 240 hertz gaming. And hey, it'll have the outputs to actually run a display at 4K 240 with DisplayPort. So good job, Nvidia, there too. This is going to be a what 50 to 70% performance boost, and it's going to be like an octupling in frame rate boost over DisplayPort, or sanctupling. I don't know. It actually depends on the implementation of DisplayPort they use. Okay, so that is the 5090 update, but I do have some questions that touch on that. So Spencer Walker writes in and he says, Steam Deck is my only PC, and the 7900 GRE overclocking potential looks good, but should I wait for RDNA 4 if the RTX 4080 for 500, or if it's a 4080 for $500 to $600? I like NVIDIA DLSS, and RT better is way more worth it. My monitor is 4K. But so you have a 4K monitor and you only have a Steam Deck? I mean, I don't know, man. I would consider building now. You can look for some good deals, can't you? At least a temporary graphics card. Um, let me see here. Like, what can you get on eBay, man? I mean, if you have a 4K monitor and you're gaming on a Steam Deck right now, I would say build. Especially, again, shameless plug here, but Micro Center, links in the description. You can get like what is it, a 7800 X3D with like 32 gigabytes of free RAM for like 350 or 370 or something. I don't think you're going to get a better deal than that at a Zen 5, because even if Zen 5 was, say, 20% faster, I don't think they're going to give you free RAM with it at launch at Micro Center. So I would get the PC now. Build your PC now and get a temporary graphics card if you're that worried. I mean, you can get a 7600 XT for, I mean, what, 7600 XT? How many more teraflops is that even? Isn't that like almost 10 times the teraflops of, probably not 8 times the teraflops of the Steam Deck? Yeah, I mean, build your PC now, Spencer Walker, if that's what your argument is. And I don't think your discussion is, do I need to get a 7900 GRE? Do I need to get a 4080 now? The question is, do you want to game way better than a Steam Deck now? And do you use your PC a lot? That's at least what I would say. And in fact, I think even like the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte has almost been priced reasonably a few times here, which is to say, if it was below 400, I actually kind of like that product. Yeah, so the 4060 Ti 16 gigabytes 430, a 7700 XT is getting down to 420. There was that price drop I've never even talked about yet. I mean, that's the type of thing where I'm like, there's really no need to wait, that because let me double check this here. Let's align price performance here. 4060 Ti. Let me go to Tech Power Up. And let me compare it to the 7900 GRE. 7900 GRE is a lot faster. All right, 1.5 times 430. Of course, it matters how much you like DLSS. Yeah, I mean, I would say though, if you could get a 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti for like $400, yeah, I don't know. I'd just probably do it now, or a 7600 XT again for like 30% or more or less than that. I would just do that now, because let me look at where the 7600 XT is on the Tech Power Up chart too, which isn't perfect, but it's usually pretty accurate these days. 7900 GRE. Yeah. All right. So 330, which is the 7900 XT. Uh, yeah, be 550 divided by 330. So that's 67% more. So yeah, the price performance, the frame per dollar between the 7600 XT and the 7900 GRE is fairly close, yet they have the same amount of RAM. That's why I still kind of like the 7600 XT a decent amount. So I don't know, man. Do you want to get a 7900 GRE right now? Here's what I'm going to say. If you got a 7900 GRE right now, worst case scenario, in 6 months, RDNA 4 comes out and it's 20% better for 10% less money. Is that better? Yeah, I mean, it is better, but you were able to game all summer on a card that you wanted. So I don't know. If you're gaming on a 4K monitor with a Steam Deck, my advice is just decide what your minimum performance is now if you want to save money, because then you can just get this, sell it later, and get RDNA 4 if you're worried about that. But I mean, look, man, this is one of those circumstances where I'm like, I'd probably just buy it now so you can have a fun summer. And then if you get worried, you can always sell that 7900 GRE a month before the RDNA 4 comes out, and I'll tell you ahead of time if I think that's a smart decision. So yeah, I lean towards buy now. You have a 4K monitor. This is getting ridiculous. All right, let me move on to this question here. 7900 GRE shopping advice. Let us. I was going to move on to console questions, but let's continue with the Nvidia and Radeon stuff, because I'm seeing a lot here. So Code writes in, thank you for the tip, and he says, do you believe that there's any hope a 5090 or 50 Titan could be released with 40 gigabytes of RAM or more? Any hope? Some, but if you put a gun up to my head, I would suggest that the 5090 is going to be between 32 and, yeah, like 24 to 32 to 36 gigabytes, depending on which capacity of GDDR7 they use, which I've confirmed that as well. GDDR7 will be used by the 5090. So yeah, I would say I find it unlikely they go with 40 gigabytes. That feels like, if my gut just says Nvidia looks at 40 and they're like, we want a workstation product to have that, not a gaming one. But I would say there's definitely hope of 32 to 36 gigabytes. I would think so. I think they're going to raise it over the 4090 most likely. So remember, that's up to them to decide. They could change their mind last minute any direction, but I don't think 40. I think 32 or 36, which is really quite a bit for gaming, by the way. Let me keep scrolling down here. All right, let me see. I see a Nintendo Switch question. See a 7700X question. All right, let me continue with the Radeon and Nvidia questions. Remember, hit the like button, everybody. We have 1,100 people watching. Let's get to 1,100 likes. Nicholas Buckner writes in, and he says, have other AIBs expressed disinterest in using the 12 VH power connector? Are there any others planning on doing an EVGA bow out? No, not over that. I don't think anyone's gonna say we're quitting making graphics because Nvidia has this connector. Are they excited about it? No. I mean, everyone's complained about the 12 VH power connectors or 16 pin or 12 volt times 6 times 2 or whatever there's like a million names for it now, depending on what region you're in. No, AIVs aren't that happy about the connector. It works fine. The more money the company has, the less they care because the easier it is for them to meet the safety factor. But all of them have had headaches and melted cards due to it, and weird issues with electrical components on a PC that has them. And all I can say is they don't like it, but none of them see it as something worth quitting over. KJM015 writes in and says, hey, Tom, do you think the lackluster sales of Lovelace, besides the 4090, will influence pricing for Blackwell? Or will Nvidia maintain elevated MSRPs? Will they continue the trend of massively gimping their hardware? Or will we actually be getting some bang for our buck this time around? Write that down to Blackwell pricing. So I think you kind of are answering your own question there, KJM015. The 4090, despite having a higher MSRP than the 3090, they can't keep the bloody thing in stock if it's at or below MSRP. Now it gets towards 2000, people say, I don't really want that unless it's for AI. But, what that means is what Nvidia is seeing from this market, of course they're going to be influenced. What they're going to say is, okay, so if it's not the best card, it needs to be below 1,000 to sell well, basically. They got away with $1,200 for Titans, $1,200 for the 2080 Ti, $1,500 for the 3090. That's because at a minimum, those cards were perceived to be the best gaming cards. And Nvidia knows people will pay for it. So I think what Nvidia is going to say is, all right, it does seem like 4090 sales they're not flying off the shelves above 2,000. But what we can say is if the performance is there, people will pay over 1,600. So I would say Nvidia would look at the sales data in the enthusiast space right now and go, for sure, we're going to charge 1,800 to 2,500 for the 5090. But I will say this. Notice that, like, if I go to Newegg, let me see, RTX 4090. Let's see what we're looking at here in the US. Yeah, in the US right now, there is a model for 1850, and it's not a dirt cheap. It's not a crappy one either from Asus. You've got plenty around 2000. Like if and AMD is not competing with the top card directly. And yet Nvidia still seems to be, AIBs are still selling the 4090 below 2000. What does that tell you? There is a limit to what people will pay, even if there's no competition, right? That's what I think this generation, one of the most interesting conclusions we could draw is 4070 sales went up after they dropped the price, even though the 7800 XT was now out and selling really well. There's just a certain price level that people do not want to go past for a certain card, even if there's no competition. So I would suggest, based on this data, Nvidia is going to go, we can definitely get away with like 1,800 or something for the 5090, and maybe we can push 2,500. But everything else out there, we've got to understand that below $1,000, people want that 80. They don't want it for 1,200. They don't want the 70 for 700. And they don't want a 60 class. Well, the 60 class is complicated because it's called a 60, but it's really a 50 Ti in my opinion. But I think what you're going to see is Nvidia be a bit more reasonable for the performance you gain per price below $1,000 and raise the price of the 90 class a bit. That's what the sales data is telling them they should do. Caillou Markelli writes in and asks, how bad do you think pricing and availability of high-end GPUs will become, since AMD will not provide this market segment with RDNA 4 and Blackwell chips will most likely be in competition with AI? Well, see, that's the funny thing, is I think the what would push Nvidia to price the 5090 above 2000, like I said, I think it's going to be 1800 to $2500. It would be if they do decide to give it, for example, 36 gigabytes of RAM and the AI boom is continuing, and it probably will be to a certain extent. So I think what you'll see is Nvidia either put it at 1800 to get good reviews, but it'll sell out and it'll really be 2500, or they'll just price the 5090 at 2500 and say, tough shit, people. I mean, people at AI are buying this, so this is the price for it. And so I, I I would suggest availability is going to suffer. Again, there's a limit to what people will pay, but if there is a way to sell it somewhere else, and before it was mining, this time it's AI, Nvidia is going to go, well, we're going to put it at the limit then, which seems to be around $2,000 or something, and then we're not going to make a lot of them as long as AI people will pay more. That's what I see Nvidia doing. And then below that, they'll understand that there's no point in releasing a 70 card for $800 or something, because people will not buy it for that price probably. Um, Sarcastro writes in and he says, hi, Tom. With RDNA 4 going back to monolithic design, any information on the future use of chiplets for GPUs from AMD? Is monolithic the way forward, or can the RDNA 3 issues be overcome for enthusiast GPUs with further development? I don't think guys, it didn't hit the upper end of the performance targets they wanted, RDNA 3, but they did hit their minimums, and they are able to make these for less than Nvidia can and sell them for less. AMD has been able to undercut the 4080 with the 7900 XTX, and it is selling very well. So do not take away from this generation that RDNA 3 failed. Radeon sales are up. This is a fact in their earnings. It has not failed. It's just, it wasn't as good as they were hoping. So I do not expect them to abandon chiplets for GPUs, because this wasn't a failure. Having said that, I really don't have any specifics. To be fair, I haven't asked about it though. Like, just because I know what RDNA 4 is, then I know that RDNA 5 isn't coming out until late 2025 at the earliest. And because of that, I'm just paying more attention to Nintendo Switch 2, PS5 Pro, what's going on with Xbox, upcoming Blackwell stuff, because it's coming out sooner, than an RDNA 5 product. I don't really see a point in asking about it that much yet until we talk about this stuff that hasn't even happened yet. So I don't think they're going to abandon chiplets. But having said that, I have nothing specific to report about what they're going to do with chiplets or when in the future. I'm sure they'll have new chiplet GPUs in the future, but I haven't looked into what they would be, or if it's RDNA 5 versus RDNA 6. Although you put a gun up to my head, I'm going to say RDNA 5 is going to use chiplets for some of its models, So, Multinatty writes in and says, RDNA 4 and Blackwell marketing questions. Hello, Tom. I believe that Nvidia's marketing for Blackwell will focus heavily on generative AI based on RTX chat that they released recently. AMD support for AI with ROCm is getting there on Linux, but generally on Windows, they're quite behind Nvidia on supporting AI. What do you think of what AMD could do against the very much possible AI marketing attack vector? Maybe condense this sentence a little bit more, Multinatty, no offense, but that I believe Nvidia is cooking. I agree with the AI dev of releasing a 32 gigabyte card, but ROCm support needs to be better on Windows before that card becomes disruptive against Nvidia's lineup. I mean, I think you kind of answered your question. You asked several, but so first of all, the question, what do you think AMD can do against the AI marketing attack vector? Give everything more RAM than they need to, which I think they might have high VRAM models offered. Again, if the 8800 XT achieves better than 7900 XT performance, and they can sell it for $500 with a good profit, then if I was AMD, I would say, okay, well, now we're going to make a 32 gigabyte version of the card for 650 or something. And if someone wants to overclock it, and because I hear it should get to pretty high clock speeds, and they want 32 gigabytes so they can pretend they have like a budget 5090. Well, it won't be a budget 5090. It'll be like half the performance of a 5090, but it'll have a similar amount of RAM. So maybe someone will tell them it's the same. Just like buying a RX 480 instead of a GTX 1080. Like, I think that's a good move, and it will help people buy it for AI. But that is the way to get around it. Just making their software better, offering more RAM than Nvidia, and I think that's enough to get some sales. Now, things like RTX chat and all those other things, AMD's just going to have to work on it. I mean, that is an advantage Nvidia has right now, but it doesn't need to be a death blow advantage. If you ask me, AMD can say, well, maybe theirs has this one thing, but we have this other AI software feature we just launched, and we have double the RAM. I think this is something AMD can mitigate, but it is definitely an advantage of Nvidia. It's just not one that I think makes RDNA 4 doomed. Again, Radeon sales are up. They're up. So it's not like AMD's screwed where they are even right now. All they have to do is improve their software, offer features Nvidia nickels and dimes for, and at a minimum, they will keep their place in the market. But it doesn't change the fact that in advantage AI, Nvidia does have that. So, okay. I did see. We'll get to that question later. I don't really care about that one. Let me go up to the more console questions. So, Dick Crazy writes in with a tipped question. Thank you. He says, any word on backwards compatibility between the Nintendo Switch and Switch 2? Honestly, I haven't even asked about it. Not even asked one person if it is. I'm just assuming it is. So I thought I saw some rumors that might be an issue. Um, what is what's the Nintendo Switch teraflops? Isn't it like half a teraflop in docked mode? Nintendo Switch. Yeah, I mean, I think it's 0.5 teraflops. So if the Switch 2 is even 3 teraflops, that's 6x. I mean, come on, guys. I think they could do this. At a minimum, you can emulate it, right? Can't the Steam Deck emulate the Switch well? Steam Deck Switch emulator. Current state of Switch emulation. What is this from? 3 months ago. Let me look. Da-da-da-da-da. It's almost there with the Steam Deck, and I know that the Switch 2 is going to be at least a bit stronger of a GPU. Again, I don't think it will match the Series S. I think maybe it could get close to the Series S in experience, but no, I don't. Yeah, if the Steam Deck can emulate the Switch, then an Nvidia handheld with a GPU that's at least 20% stronger than the Switch can emulate it as well. So I haven't asked about backwards compatibility, but it would be insane to me if it didn't have it. That's what I'll say. Let me put that down as a timestamp here because I'm sure a lot of people have a question about that Switch to backwards compatibility. And another Switch question. Doomy Thick writes in and he says, any specifics on Switch 2 clock speeds? I mean, I think in docked mode, it's going to be pretty dang low, guys. you know, I don't know an exact number. I have heard mention of a ballpark. What I will say is I expect the Switch 2's handheld mode to be between 500 and 800 megahertz, with it probably being around the middle of that. So that'd be like 650, 600, 700 is probably definitely 500 to 800 megahertz, I think. So pretty low in docked mode, but I believe in undocked mode and handheld mode, pretty low. In docked mode, I think it's 900 to 1.3 gigahertz. And that's what's going to dictate if it's 3 or 4 teraflops, right? So it also is FP16. I think that's worth pointing out that one reason the Switch has been able to keep up in some games, and when I say keep up, I mean run it at all, is that they use FP16 extensively to have 1 teraflop of FP16. And this is going to have very good FP16 performance because it's kind of derived from an AI chip. The chip Orin they're using. It's not Orin, it's a customized version of it, but it does have some of those features. So, it could be 3 to 4 teraflops FP32, but in FP16, it will be 6 to 8 teraflops, right? And with that in mind, if they go to at least 1.2 gigahertz in docked mode, I think that's enough to give you an okay experience. The CPU will be the weakness, though, like I said at the beginning of this. It will be the weakness for sure. And so I think it's more so going to, although Nintendo first party games I don't think need a very powerful CPU. So those might look beautiful on a 4K screen, but AAA games, I would expect a lot of them to run at 30 frames per second. But hey, 30 frames is better than 20 frames in The Witcher, right? That's an improvement for Nintendo. The new YouTube UI button hides the the like button with live chat. Well, that's terrible, but please find a way to like it if you can. I see 500,000 of you have, so please keep that up. The likes. Got some more tipped questions here. Let me keep scrolling down. Sent you an email. Boost clocks is high. That can't be correct. Your 7700X is boosting to 7.5 gigahertz. Porter. Porter writes in and says his 7700X is boosting to 77.5 gigahertz. Something is wrong with the software then, unless it's Sub-Zero cooling. That's what's going on there. Or it's reading some other clock speed that is not the core clock. That is not running at 7.5 gigahertz. Let me see here. If you do have questions, the best way to do it is to join the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. It's just $2 a month, and then you can ask questions and die shrinks through Telegram requests. You can talk to people in the Discord; they will answer your question. And if the right here, you can ask questions on every broken silicon. So I get dozens of emails a day to ask a question. Just join the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. We're not charging $10 to get in, guys. And remember, you're paying me, Dan Gerard, Carbon Cry, a whole team of people too. So if it makes you feel better, you're not just paying me. It's going to a whole team of people it's helping them pay their rent, or entirely pay it. I think in the case of Gerard. But let me see here. All right, so let me see. Did I get through that CPU question? Let me hold this question and continue the console ones. I do see your question though, Naughty DJ Aftershock. So, all right, let me move on here. Yeah, let's get to some Steam Deck questions. I think that's more on subject before we round out back to Zen. Put down a timestamp. All right. Chris Rich writes in and he says, you recently mentioned that AMD is working on an APU for the next Steam Deck. Do you know if Valve paid for the development costs? If so, I'd expect it to be a Valve exclusive, which would also indicate that the Steam Deck was very profitable. If not, perhaps AMD will give Valve temporary exclusive access like they did for Asus with their Z1 processor. Yes. So yeah, I know that Valve and AMD have already signed the contract for the Steam Deck 2. And 100% that's going to them, which is a surprise to nobody. But if you're wondering, it's AMD APU again. Is Valve helping with development costs? Yeah, I would think so somewhat, but I don't think as much as Sony. The way I've had it explained to me with the PS5 and PS6 soon, well, not soon, soonish, is that Sony really does co-develop with AMD. Like my understanding is Microsoft goes to AMD and just barks demands at them and says, you will make the best console now. Sony goes to AMD and says, let's talk about it. Let's have a meeting. We have some computer engineers who have run some simulations that think this would work better. Would you be interested in co-developing an audio engine with us? Like Sony literally co-developed some of the tech in the PS5 with AMD that benefits AMD. Microsoft just barks orders at them from what I hear. And I would expect Valve to be in the middle of that. More so Valve going, what do you have? Show us, and we will tweak it to our liking a bit based on cost. So I'm sure they're helping with the development cost a little bit, not as much as Sony. And this person says, if they are helping with that, I would expect it to be Valve exclusive. Well, so far, the thing the Steam Deck uses is Valve exclusive. So at a minimum, I would say there will be a variant of, let's say they uses Kraken or Kraken Next. I would expect them to take some derivative of that and at least claim it's exclusive. But let's remember, what APU did Microsoft say was exclusive to them? I think it was like wasn't it the R7 3780U? Am I remembering this correctly, everybody? That 12 nanometer APU with an extra compute unit enabled. I think it had 700, like 11 compute units or something, and most a Vega at the time had 10. I mean, if only I had access to Google. Oh, wait, I do. AMD. Am I remembering this correctly? Yeah, the 3780U Microsoft edition. They said they had an exclusive version for the Surface that has 11 compute units. I mean, look, guys, that was, I think, basically just the APU they were selling, but they had a special variant that was binned with an extra compute unit enabled compared to usual. So, I would expect at a minimum something like that. And so there will be some model like, I don't think here's how I'll answer your question, Chris Trick. I don't think Valve is going to announce a Steam Deck 2 and say it uses the 9840U. Like, I don't, it's not just going to use like an off the shelf variant. At a minimum, I would expect them to take some variant that's there, bin it differently, different custom voltage curves, maybe have some part enabled, disabled, or snuck in there for them. At a minimum, I would expect it to be like the Microsoft Surface Edition, where they have a variant of something that's out there tailored to them to some degree that other people don't have. Will it be fully custom like the PS5 or Series X? I'm not sure yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. And if it was, then of course only they have it. The only caveat I will say, Chris, there have been PS5 APUs that have showed up in Chinese pre-builts, right? I don't remember the name of it, but there's some, I think Series S's or Series X's as well. Like there's some GDDR6 APU that's out there that is clearly just using disabled PS5 dies. So that's the thing is, well, I can't promise you they won't use some version of it for something else. But again, I'd expect them to have some level of exclusivity with it. Yes. Ugh. Dark Helmet writes in and he says, with the success of the Steam Deck, do you think there is any prospect of a new Steam machine? Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I don't see the need for it. I mean, I would almost wonder. I'm trying to think if there's, I don't, the Steam machines were just running Steam OS on a PC. So could there be another push for that? Maybe, but I don't see them right now designing a custom Xbox Series X competitor that is not a handheld. I don't really see that happening anytime soon, nor have I heard of that. And I think I probably would have from a couple of people if that was going on. Kennehoon25 writes and he says, hey, Tom, what are your thoughts on Helldivers 2? Sony has been looking for its, I guess we'll change the subject here then and put a new timestamp. See, we're at 10705. Business model. PS. All right. What are your thoughts on Helldivers 2? Sony has been looking for its big multiplayer online game for years now, and it seems they finally stumbled onto it. Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of agree. I never thought about how often that comes up that like Sony wants their big online game, and now they clearly found it with Helldivers 2. We all thought it would be Bungie or one of its prior big AAA studios that produce it, but now it's a small, independent, second-party company. At one point, the game was so popular, the servers couldn't handle the amount of people trying to play it. I know, me and my friends were very annoyed. My question is, how do you think this game will influence how Sony will react to multiplayer games in the future? And how do you think other third-party AAA game studios will react, since their live service games seem to all be bombing compared to this one? It's a hell of a lot of fun to play, and it's only $40. You and Dan should give it a try. We own it. We've been playing it for weeks. So an interesting point that you're stumbling into, Kennehoon, that I have not thought about is that if we look at the most popular online games, let me look. Most popular on. If you're wondering, by the way, when you Google most popular, apparently Christmas songs is the first thing Google suggests to you. Fortnite, Minecraft, League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Hearthstone, Call of Duty, Dota, PUBG, Among Us, GTA 5, Rocket League, Overwatch. So let me just take the top 12. And I don't know if these are in a specific order, but all right. Fortnite, Minecraft, League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Hearthstone, Call of Duty, Dota, PUBG, Among Us, Rocket League, Overwatch. So here's a point I would make, Kennehoon, kind of taking what you just said to another level. I just listed some of the top, online games right now. And if you look at it, I don't know about Among Us, actually. I may have said that wrong. Don't get mad at me in the comments. But you could argue that at least a fourth of the most popular online hits, like Minecraft, Rocket League, Helldivers now, like a lot of these games were, and PUBG, a lot of these games were from indie studios. I think there's a real argument here, Kenu, and I think you're onto something. I think there's a real argument here that a major mistake that publishers are making right now is that they're suggesting, well, we got to get the next big multiplayer hit. Look at Warzone. And then they're making all their AAA studios waste their time. Look at what happened with Naughty Dog. They wasted all this time on factions and then canceled it. They could have probably made an entirely new IP by now that launched and made Sony and themselves money and a new fan base, a new universe. Instead, they wasted time on factions. I would make an argument that if you're going to do this thing, publishers all seem to be hell bent on doing, where they insist that studios try to make the next Fortnite, that what they do is they do that with AA and indie studios. Because if it's a talented studio, maybe only 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 of them succeed. But you're wasting so much less money if it's an indie studio who comes up with Deep Rock Galactic, who comes up with Minecraft, who comes up with Helldivers 2, who comes up with Rocket League, then it is a waste of money if Naughty Dog, arguably one of the few quadruple A studios, wasted years on something that doesn't work. Think of how much of one of them wastes money versus the other. It's not to say that if a AAA studio wants to try to make a big online game, you should stop them. Let them do it, baby. Sometimes you get something like Call of Duty Warzone that surprisingly works from a studio that's not known for making new ideas. You know, that that's not something you should stop. But I would argue if you're Sony, you should be looking at more AA and indie dev studios of like 5 to 50 people that can sit down and come up with creative ideas. And if it fails, you wasted so much less money than if you made Naughty Dog or 343 waste all of their time. I think you're onto something, Kenahoon. I do think you're onto something. Again, don't stop someone from making a AAA online game if that's what they want to do. But I think it's a much safer bet to just make another Halo or Uncharted or something than it is to say, hey, the people working on Uncharted, we're not going to make a new Uncharted that can make us $500 million. Instead, we want you to make a online game that may flop and lose us hundreds of millions. Tell your indie studios to do that. I think that's an interesting point. And again, I'm just sitting here going, Deep Rock Galactic, Minecraft, Rocket League. I mean, yeah, PUBG. A lot of these were indie studios, so maybe publishers are going about this the entirely wrong way. Resident Mexican writes in yet again and says, if Sony does make a custom upscaler for the PS5 Pro, do you think Sony would allow game developers to run their games at 30 frames per second, justifying it by saying they have the best visual quality ever seen, or they try to mandate a minimum of 60 or even 40 frames per second with VRR, like you said in an early Broken Silicon? And say they would. I would just say I would definitely push them to do that. I think Sony should require devs to make their games run at double the frame rate that the standard PS5 version does on PS5 Pro. Well, that's a slippery slope. Let me put down a timestamp for this one as well. Mandating frame rates. So, should Sony mandate? I don't think it should be a mandate, right? I don't think so. I don't think Sony should go, you cannot release GTA 6 unless it's at 60 frames per second or something. I just think they can't quite do that. If they wanted to, look, people, Sony cancels things. They pulled Cyberpunk from the PlayStation Store. If they really wanted to mandate it, they could. I just don't think it'd be a good move. What I would suggest Sony should just do is nudge super hard and maybe have a way to experimentally force higher frame rates in some games. And then go to the developer and say, hey, look, there's this clause in our contract that you are up to your frame rates and resolution targets. Rockstar, whatever you want to do, you do it. You can do it. We can't stop you. But we're going to add one clause here that says the way our dev kits work is we can try to force a higher frame rate through the OS if we want to. And if it works and we think it works well, you also can't stop us. That's what I would do if I was Sony. I wouldn't mandate it. That's taking away power from the devs. Let them, if they want to try, if they think it's worth it to make a maximum resolution, maximum image quality game. They want to make a 1080p 30 game that looks photorealistic instead of a 1440p 60 game that looks almost photorealistic. It's up to them. Maybe they have good vision. Maybe they know this is a good idea for their gameplay. Maybe 30 frames per second. It's a walking simulator. If I was Sony, I wouldn't stop people from having full control over what they want to do. You don't want to take away from a dev's vision. But again, what I would do is have a clause that says we can experimentally try to force a higher frame rate. And if we think it works well, we're going to make it happen. And we're just going to say we at least added a 40 VRR mode to GTA 6 that you can force through the menu. And maybe that you have to do it through the OS. Maybe you just do it in the PlayStation UI. But we're going to keep it there, Rockstar, because it does work, and we're going to do it. That's what I would do. But don't mandate that the devs have to hit some exact thing. That's just going to cause fights, and you don't want to take away control from the devs completely here. XTX999 writes in, and he says, with Sony laying off 900 people, my only question is, why is Media Molecule still around if they felt the need to let off that many workers? I don't fucking know. I don't know. I don't know why Media Molecule gets this blank check, and yet there's rumors that Sony may kill Bend. I don't know. That's my answer. Dave Schultz writes in, and he says, what do you think an Xbox handheld could look like, especially in hardware? Would they go for a custom SoC or maybe even something off the shelf like the Strix Halo? I mean, look, guys, it's going to look like a Steam Deck or laptop. What's the handheld Xbox? The Steam Deck. Just use Steam. It works better than Game Pass. Like that is that. And anything else, an ROG Ally runs Game Pass. You already have it. If I was Microsoft, the only way I would do a handheld or a mobile Xbox is if it was a Surface laptop that could boot into a native Xbox mode. And I think that'd be an interesting idea. I think if they released a Xbox Series Z, whatever the hell the next gen Xbox is called, and then they took the literal same die. Let's say it's a 32 gigabyte. I don't know what it would be at this point. It'd probably be based on at least RDNA 5 in a few years. So what would we be looking at then? 60. I don't know. Let's say it's some like 100 teraflop RDNA 5, which it could be. I mean, the 7900 XTX today is 60 teraflops. So you do several node shrinks, RAM gets cheaper, new architecture with new features. You can see 100 teraflops. So let's say there's this 100 teraflop Xbox Series Z in a few years with 32 gigabytes of RAM. What I would do is I would take that same SoC, make sure it works with boost clocks. Actually, boost Microsoft. That was so silly that they kneecap themselves in clock speed by having fixed clocks, and give it 64 gigabytes and make it a Surface. And then what do? Have a button, maybe not a button, but some toggle you can press that boots into native Xbox mode and just runs Xbox games. There you go. Just runs Xbox. But if you boot into the other mode, it has, 64 gigabytes RAM, and it's also a great laptop. That's what I would do if I was Microsoft. I wouldn't bother with a handheld. It exists. It's called the ROG Ally. It can run Game Pass. That is your handheld Xbox. That is something that the laptop that literally boots into an Xbox mode, though, is something no one else can or is making, and therefore it's interesting. You don't beat the competition by making the same thing. Sony shouldn't copy the Switch 2. They shouldn't have like Joy Me's, but they're PlayStation Me's. That's stupid. Sony's handheld, if it does well, it's going to be because it's its own version of a handheld. And I think Microsoft's version would just be a Surface laptop that boots into Xbox mode and can plug in a nice controller. That's what I would do. Heck, I might buy it. I don't know. That's what they should do, in my opinion. Woody Chang writes in and says, hi, Tom. With Switch 2 being rumored to have a file decompression engine and the PS5's own file decompression engine, do you think that we will have something dedicated for file decompression? A lot of decompressions in this sentence here on PC. We technically have direct storage, but no one really supports it. And if you use it while GPU is already doing graphical stuff, it bogs everything down. It seems that the PC should have dedicated hardware to keep parity with consoles, but will be part of the GPU, CPU, or even NPU in the future. I mean, look, man, I think that let me put that down here too as a timestamp and held. I think that the solution is just brute force for now. I think we might eventually get this stuff? Yeah, maybe. And I think, I think it would be totally plausible the Steam Deck 2, if they take a custom version of an APU, they add that to it. I could see a Steam Deck doing that. But when it comes to general purpose APUs and graphics cards, I mean, you say it bogs it down, a graphics card to use direct storage. That's not really true. It just pulls 20% of the performance away. All right, well, guess what? A 4090 is like a lot stronger. A 4080, a 4070 even is a lot stronger than at least a PS5. So I think what devs will say is don't waste some of the die space on this extra thing that we now need to program. Just give us 10, 20% more teraflops in the gaming GPU. And then, well, whatever, when it's loading stuff, it will use some of the GPU's performance. And I think the same thing with like IO controllers is, yeah, the PS5 kind of functions like a 12 core, they say, or more Zen 2 CPU when it's using all of its IO controllers at the same time. But it's not always using all of its IO controllers. And we're long past Zen 2. Like Zen 5 is going to offer, I think, double the performance per core of Zen 2, roughly, maybe even a little more than that. Like, all right, so that means that in 8-core Zen 5, can game and do all the IO stuff like a 16-core Zen 2 could. So I think it's just brute force. The answer just will continue to be brute force. And by the time all developers are requiring this on PC, the PC hardware is going to be so much faster than the PS5 and already way faster than the Switch 2 that, yeah, that's just their solution, I think, for the foreseeable future. Again, I could see like a Steam Deck 2, maybe if Asus had a custom APU or, they might put in something like that to match what the Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation can do. But I don't. I think brute force for the most part is going to continue to be the answer. Which okay, let me get to some CPU questions here. I see a ton of tipped questions are still coming in, and I'm finally going to get to that tipped Zen 6 one. Right. Naughty DJ Aftershock writes and it says, based on your Zen 6 leaks, am I to assume that Zen 6 has finally switch the light to Infinity Links as used on RDNA 3 and will look as such? All I can say is it uses the next generation in fabric, So what Zen 6 does is a fundamentally better fabric architecture than Zen 5 or what's before it. And I think that will have pretty big repercussions for high refresh rate gaming and smoothness. So that's what I'll say about Zen 6 right now. Let me see here. Non writes in and says, bro, but AMD must release a flagship RDNA 4 so I can buy my 5090 cheaper. Can't argue with that. That's what half of the people seem to be saying in the comments. And they say, why won't AMD do better? I just want them to make my stuff cheaper. Shaman writes in and says, hey, Tom, can you stay on Rock'em and ZLUDA a bit longer? Any news here or plans to make a full video diving into this? I've heard this one way AMD thinks it can win and get Nvidia off balance. Maybe. I don't plan to do a full video because it's kind of outside of my purview. I describe Moore's Law is Dead as a gaming hardware channel. So what does that mean? Well, if it has to do with what's going on with Xbox's business model, that's gaming. If it has to do with the Switch 2, I'm probably going to talk about the hardware in the Switch 2. And if it has to do with, even Epic, or Xeon releases, well, that is hardware that relates to the hardware that goes into gaming devices. But the second you get into Rock'em and ZLUDA, it's not really gaming anymore. It's not really the hardware anymore that I follow, right? Like I usually will talk about enterprise hardware, gaming stuff, or gaming hardware, but this is already getting 2 steps away from it. So will I touch on it? I probably should. I'm sure I will have a guest on at some point soon. I'm sure the next time I have Wendell from Level 1 Techs on, he will want to talk about ZLUDA, and that's when I will do it. But would you rather me do a full video on ZLUDA or Arrow Lake or Zen 7 next week? I'm going to guess everyone right now is typing Zen 7 and Arrow Lake, not ZLUDA. So there is a certain amount of this where I just have to make a good business decision that if it's not something I talk about a lot, it's not something that's worth it for me to talk about a ton. But I have noticed it, and I think ZLUDA could be a game changer for AMD. It's going to take a year for everyone to realize it's a game changer, for everyone who uses CUDA to see it be stable for a year. You need like a year or two of people going, hey, have you noticed this ZLUDA thing works just as well as CUDA? I've been using it for the past few months. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I heard about that a year ago. Maybe we should look into that. That's the type of thing that I think will need to happen before it changes the game. And that is still a year away. So there's the mini video you probably wanted. Those are my early thoughts on it. I have had those thoughts, just not the time to make a video because Switch 2 will perform better and it's more something I'm more interested in. Arrow Lake, Zen 7, I'm more interested in, and so on and so forth. Um, Let me make sure I don't miss a question here. All right, here we go. And then let me get to this CPU question here. To ZLUDA. Let me put down a timestamp for Sienna. Chris Rich writes in and he says, it's been nearly half a year since AMD's Sienna server processors and the latest Threadripper processors launched. Yeah, I guess. Any idea how they are selling? Very well in pre-built workstations from like Lenovo. But outside of that, guys, AIBs don't care. Like motherboard makers don't care. Like the do-it-yourself Threadripper sales, they just literally say things to me like they're shit. Like, and they will be shit. So I think in workstation, Threadripper continues to sell very well. And by that, I mean like from Lenovo and so on and so forth to like Hollywood studios that might buy 100 Lenovo Threadripper workstations in bulk for their artists. But I don't hear anyone talk about it in terms of do-it-yourself sales. So I just don't think it's really on anyone's radar, and that it's just not where the market's really going right now for a lot of reasons. That like the people that wanted a 16 core before were blown away. They could get a 2900X 2900X 16 core Zen Plus for $900. But now you can get a 16 core Zen 4 for $500-ish dollars. And I don't think there's a lot of people who are going, yeah, I'm going to go spend 1,000 again. No, they're like, I needed 16 cores. Now I have 16 cores. And until that changes, I'm just going to stick with 16 cores for $500 instead of buying a $2,000 CPU. Again, unless it's someone that needs a workstation. And in that realm, it's still selling well. I just think it's less of a do-it-yourself thing anymore until we demand more cores. But no one is the best-selling product on Amazon for CPU is a 7800X3D. The market is not telling AMD they want more cores. All right. Joni writes in and he says, have you heard anything about shakeups in desktop memory? HBM greater than 2 in channel memory? Any platforms with weirdly fast memory? I mean, I guess I'll put down a timestamp here. Next gen memory. I mean, at the chance that this will age badly, I don't hear anyone talking about HBM for gaming stuff right now. So, no, HBM I've actually heard has gotten a lot more expensive recently per gigabyte. So that's just becoming purely an enterprise professional memory standard right now. That's HBM in one bucket. In another bucket, GDDR7 is coming out at the end of this year. I believe the ability to go to higher capacities is going to have a profound impact on low-end gaming cards, because right now basically AMD has to decide, are we going to have worse margins and sell a 16 gigabyte 7600 XT that everyone still bitches about because it cost us $70 more to make than the 7600, or do we give it 8 gigabytes and then everyone hates it anyways? GDDR7 is eventually going to allow them to make a 128-bit card with 12 gigabytes. Right now, the Switch 2 can do that because of LPDDR5 already supports that. I think that's going to be a big shakeup in the market next year when you have 128-bit 12 gigabyte cards, 16 gigabyte, even 16 gigabyte 128-bit cards eventually that don't need to use a clamshell design to get there. That sort of, 192-bit cards that get to like 18 or 24 gigabytes without needing a clamshell. That's going to be a big difference, but that's basically it. I mean, DDR5's trucking, DDR6 will come out eventually. GDDR7 will do what I said, but that's pretty much it. I don't really see HBM being something gamers talk about a lot for years, because it just really has become something for non-gaming devices due to how much it costs. Good question, though. Spencer Walker 21 writes in and he says, if the Steam Deck 2 came out mid-2026, could we get, all right, here we go. We're having one of these fun, goofy questions. Let me write down a timestamp. Hypothetical Steam Deck 2026. I'll do it for you right now. If a Steam Deck 2 came out mid-2026, so Strix Halo comes out beginning of next year, 2025, with 40 compute units. So you're saying 26, so that'd be a Zen 6 RDNA 5 APU, most likely. on 3 nanometer instead of 4, or maybe even, or at least a much better 3 nanometer. I mean, right now, I believe, let me pull up my old Strix Halo document here just as a touchstone. One of those old trusty things that I look at a lot. What video was that? Let me see. Was it this one? Nope. It was video 399 was the video that I had the Strix Halo leak from a year ago. Can you believe it's already been a year, everybody? All right, let me pull this up. What performance class are we looking at in power consumption? So Strix Halo was targeting 20 work groups at 100 watts, 16 work groups, so 32 compute units at 80 watts, and 10 work groups at 45 watts. So I think it's going to turn out better than AMD expected. Strix Halo kind of seems like. So even if we bump that up, though, or down like 25 watts for 10 work groups, that's 20 compute units. So let's use that as a touchstone. All right, Spencer. So in about a year from now, we can do 10 work groups at 20 watts. 25 watts. So a year after that, do I think we can get 10 work groups down to 15 watts? Yeah, maybe. But I think that would be that. And you're proposing 32, CU. I think it's more likely the Steam Deck 2 is 16 to 24 compute units. Yeah. And that would be with 2-hour battery life. I think batteries will be better than probably. I don't think 32. I think what you would look at is 16 to 24 compute units in 2026 with a 3-hour battery life. So you'd be looking at something like 6 times faster than the Steam Deck, which where would that place it? Because the Steam Deck's really about as strong as a PS4 or something, which is like a 7.8. So let's go there. Let's go 7870 tech power up. It's not perfect, but I'm going to fully answer your question here. Because yeah, you double it, triple it, give it more IPC. To say 5 times performance. I think you could be looking at something that is about 7600 XT to 6700 XT. So I think in 2026, if it probably be an expensive device, by the way, if Valve wanted to, they could give you PS5 performance on the go, but it'd be expensive. What I would suggest is they'll probably go for a little weaker than the PS5. A little weaker, yeah, but it will feel like a PS5 on the go in 2026. That's 6 years after the PS5 came out, several die shrinks. Yeah, I think a little weaker than the PS5 with 2 to 3 hour battery lives and a better form factor. That's what you're going to get, I think, and if this comes out in 26, which it could. So there you go, Spencer. I put that money to work answering your question. I actually pulled up documents that I have that aren't public to answer it. So that's what I would suggest. Captain Colonel writes in and he says, "Good day from Australia. I know I'm throwing shit at the wall, but any whispers on Zen 6 or anything past RDNA 6? Yeah, but I will talk about them when I'm ready to leak them, my friend. I actually have a lot on the Zen front. We're going to leave it at that. What can I give you now as a nugget? Zen 6 will be a lot better than Zen 5, and Zen 7 is going to, I think Zen 7 is when AMD is going to go and to try to go into domination mode. Yep. Like they're going to like try to compete everywhere with the CPUs that can do everything for their niche well. So that's the hint I'll give you for like Zen 6 and 7. Albert Gonzalez writes in, thank you for the tip. I want to buy a new monitor. I actually have a 1080p monitor. Do you recommend a 1440p or 4K? Is 27-inch 4K? Yes, that's what I like. Again, a lot of this is preference. I like 4K 27 inches a lot. What monitor do you use? Well, there, I answered it. Is the difference between 1440p and 4K noticeable? It's incredibly noticeable for me. There's people that act like you can't tell the difference between 4K and 1440p, and I just don't know what they're smoking. I mean, I can tell the difference easily. Some people can't though, and if you can't, save the money. I guess you'll need a cheaper PC to enjoy it. So My advice moving forward is like 4K 120 is kind of what to aim for. You have some console games that can do 120 hertz, but most can't. It's conceivable that with the PlayStation 6 and Xbox Series Z, you'll probably have more games do 120 hertz, but I still think 60 will mostly be the standard. Um, and therefore, pretty much every game engine is going to support 120 hertz, which was not the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there were some games that kind of struggled to really run 60, and there were a lot of games that like were capped at 60 hertz and would have weird physics issues if you went above it. It's not really the case anymore. It can happen occasionally, but for the most part, 120 hertz is standardized. So 4K 120, you can always go in some direction. If your CPU is overkill, you can run it at 120 hertz locked. That's fun. If your GPU is overkill for a game, a lot of people forget this. Like I can play Age of Empires in like 8K right now with the graphics card I have, but the CPU holds it back. Well, whatever. At least I can maximize graphical. That's why I think 4K 120 is a good compromise, because in the games where your CPU is a little weak, turn up the visual quality. You'll enjoy 4K. In a game where your CPU is holding it back, or it's just not well optimized for high frame rates, I'm sorry, where your GPU is, overkill or something. Well, at least you're not at 60 hertz. That's what I was trying to say. Like, so you can always go to 120 or at least above 60 with a high resolution. You have your options. That's why I like 4K 120. I don't really recommend going to 5K. And I think 240 hertz has its place, but I'm just going to say it. 240 hertz today is like 144 hertz 10 years ago. A lot of engines don't even go above 200. A lot of engines, yes, you'll hit 240 hertz, but there will be frame drops down to 150. If you have a 4K 120, 144 hertz, you'll be able to keep it locked much more often, and there are diminishing returns past there. So that's my advice. I think it's worth it. That's what I'm at. I have a 4K 120 hertz monitor that I overclock to 130 hertz, and I have a 4090 that I just max out in 130 locked in basically every game. Any games that have like bad CPU performance, well, at least I'm above 4K 100 in any game. There's really no game I need to turn down the graphic settings for, to be honest. But, at least I can push it past, 60 hertz for most of the games that my 4090 runs easily. So that's my advice. Again, not necessarily saying I'm entirely wrong here, but, like some people might want 1440p 240. I'm just saying that's what I like. I like that type of resolution and frame rate right now. Nabusad writes in and says, I have a prediction. The Switch 2 is going to fail due to delays, a late release, and the completion, and that competition is caught up with the Vita 2 and Steam Deck. I don't know about that. I mean, this the I don't by the way, I'd rather they call it the PSP 2. Write in, by the way, in the live chat if you agree with me. I think I think the name Sony needs to go with for the PlayStation handheld, if it is a PlayStation 6 handheld, what they need to do is just call it the PlayStation 6H or 6S. I think that's the cool name. Just call it the PlayStation, or just call it the PlayStation 6. Say there's the PlayStation 6. We have the handheld version and the console version. Console version is twice as fast, but the other version works. Something like that. If I was Sony, that's what I would do. Just call the new handheld the PlayStation 6 handheld edition. That's what I would do, or call it the PSP2. Everyone here agrees, like PSP2, PlayStation Portable 2, and then the follow up is PlayStation Portable 3 and 4 and 5. I think that's a much better name than anything like Vita 2 or trying to come up with some new cool name. But I'm curious what you guys think about that. Anyways, going back to his question though. Look, the Switch 2 is coming out within a year. And remember, within a year means by early 2025. It's the I don't there's not going to be a new PlayStation handheld for at least 2 years. So it'll have at least a year, two, probably 2 or 3 without it. Now the Steam Deck 2, I could see launching within a year of the Switch 2, but it doesn't have Nintendo games, and Nintendo will have a head start. So I don't think so. I don't think the Switch 2 is going to fail at all. I think if Nintendo plays their cards right, it could do very well. I think what they need to understand, though, and what makes me excited today is after talking to some more people at Nvidia, it sounds like maybe Nintendo does understand this, is that the Switch has always been hamstrung by its performance, but it has its games. And, my girlfriend plays Animal Crossing and Zelda all the time on it, or watching TV or something, and it still is going to run those games in the future. Like, the problem, though, is you can't put all these other games on there. By the way, there's a link in the description that shows revenue. PlayStation has almost triple the revenue a year of Nintendo. This is money being left on the table here. Think of how insane that is. Almost triple the revenue of Nintendo yearly, and Nintendo has over double the consoles sold. Like, I think there's 130 million Switches sold and like 50 to 60 million PlayStation 5 sold. There's the huge PS4 install base, I suppose, but still, even combining how many people are still gaming on PS4 with PS5, it's still comparable to the Switch. Yet PlayStation's making triple the revenue. Come on, guys. This is money Nintendo's leaving on the table. Every game someone might have gotten for a Switch that they get for a PlayStation or a Steam Deck or something else is a like $10 cut, and Nintendo didn't get to take out of that game, or I think maybe what, $20 cut, something like that, 10 to 20. So I think that Nintendo hopefully is realizing that, and realizing that if you want anyone to buy a new Switch, it has to do things the old one couldn't. Being a little faster won't change a goddamn thing. They're both going to run Mario. It needs to be just fast enough to run every game the Series S can. Maybe not as high of a frame rate, maybe at a lower resolution. But if it can do that, then all of the sudden you don't have garbage editions of Hogwarts. All of the sudden you can play Helldivers 2 on a Switch. That is something that I think Nintendo probably is realizing here. And yeah, I mean, that's, if they do that, they won't fail. What would make the Switch fail is if the confirmed specs, an 8 nanometer 1536 CUDA core die, if they cut that down by 10%, refuse to give it good cooling and docked mode so it never goes above 800 megahertz, and then give it 8 gigabytes of RAM, that'd be so stupid. That is what would make people go, well, it's better, but I can't play, you know, the new Elder Scrolls game or Fallout 5. If you could play Fallout 5 on it, and instead of having, I'm hearing they're focusing on battery life, and it's just like, look, it plays games like a Steam Deck, but it's thinner than a Steam Deck, and it can play Mario. And when you dock it, it can game like an Xbox Series S. Not just as strong as one, it'll be a bit weaker probably, but you know, games like one, that is the selling point. This is now this can be your main console if you want it to be, and you can play all your Mario games. Will it sell as well as the original Switch if that's all they do? I don't know. I mean, the Switch had no competition. There was no Steam Deck, no PlayStation handheld. There was not the ROG Ally or 100 copycat handheld game. The biggest competition was, I think, the original GPD, and it had like a Atom CPU that was worse at gaming than the Switch. What a piece of shit. Like, I'm sorry. Like, people forget that even though it used Maxwell, the Switch actually had decent performance for the time compared to other non-existent handhelds. Is that or an underpowered Atom APU that costs twice as much as a Switch too. So no, they're going to have more competition now. I wouldn't bet that they're going to outsell the original Switch, but if they can launch for, you know, $399 with something that can play all AAA games that are out now, or almost all of them, there'll probably be the occasional game where the CPU is just not strong enough. And they can do that while being thinner than the Steam Deck, lighter than the Steam Deck, and run cool new games. I think the thing's going to succeed. I'm not pessimistic at all, but I do think they need to do those things. They need to do those things to really hit a home run. But it sounds like they might know that. I'm hopeful they do. Yeah, I'm not confirming. I'm 100% sure, but I am telling you, I told you in the beginning of this video what they're targeting. And so unless they don't understand how things work, which you never know with Nintendo, like I think they'll be able to hit those things. All right, let me see here. I never saw what you guys typed for that one thing. So we're gonna wrap it up soon. I'm gonna get through the final reader mails now. Any final tips, questions? Put them in, and actually let me check the Moore's Law is Dead Discord here. Yeah. So if you have any questions, put it in the after video chat section in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. Let me get to it. So Insanity Rain writes him from the Patreon. He says, "Hi, Tom. I'm interested in going into hardware design with stuff such as RISC-V, seeing as Western Digital has replaced some of their DRAM controllers from ARM to RISC-V. Do you think we'll see more RISC-V modules and technology in the future? Are there any cool projects going on that you can think of? Thank you for your time." Well, I don't really follow RISC-V that closely, but we're going to see more RISC-V stuff for sure. It's kind of like the new ARM. It's not going to replace ARM. You're still going to see plenty of ARM products. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see more and more RISC-V, but I think we're going to still see x86 keep trucking just fine, by the way. QH Freddy writes in and he says, Nvidia has always been notoriously difficult to predict. But what do you expect their next push will be if and when the AI craze can't keep the numbers up? Ooh, I like how you phrase that too, QH Freddy. Let me put that down here too. Uh, so your question is not what does Nvidia do after the AI craze busts or something. Although I don't think it's really going to bust. Like it's like the internet. If there is a 10x collapse in the AI market, it's not going away. So they'll keep making money off of AI for a long time, I think, most likely. But if AI can't keep their stock price up because it's not justifying the revenue at some point, I think they'll make gaming CPUs. I think that's the next play. I'm not kidding you. I think the next play Nvidia is going to make is a few things. Selling dedicated AI NPUs that OEMs can add to their laptops. Like, does anyone else see what I'm saying here and get their hair standing up on the back of their neck? Like, if Nintendo goes, "Oh, okay, so now Strix Halo has pushed our dedicated GPUs out of laptop, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to sell the GPU as an AI chip to add on to the AMD APU." Anyone else seeing this? I mean, this is what Nvidia will do. This is how they'll try to sell it to OEMs. And if that doesn't work, I think they will make their own laptop chips. And if that doesn't work, although it might a little bit at least, I think you're going to see Nvidia try to get into desktop somehow or something. Like they're going to try eventually. But again, that's not now. It's not tomorrow. Probably not next year. I think that's like 5 years down the line. But if we're being honest, the next direction for Nvidia to go if AI bubble collapses is to just try to compete directly with Intel and AMD. And if Intel's not doing better by then, the market will be opened up. Heck, you could almost see Nvidia buy up some fabs from Intel and ask for one of their x86 licenses. People forget that Intel has bought multiple companies with an x86 license and they could sell one to Nvidia. However, if Intel did that, they would be resigning themselves to third place for the rest of history, I think, because Nvidia would take that x86 license and just outspend Intel. So Intel might want to think about that, though. That's what would probably stop them. Nabu Sad writes in, thank you for the tip again. He says, Nintendo has a history of not understanding their fan base. History shows with the Wii U. Well, yes, but I think with the Wii U, it was about the minimum performance, and they thought the minimum performance the Wii U had to hit was a number that was wrong. But from what I'm hearing, Nintendo understands what the minimum performance needs to be for the Switch 2 to make sense. So I'm not promising you it will be at the upper end of what I'm saying, but I think even if they had like a 3 teraflop handheld in docked mode and in handheld mode, it was at least net close to the Steam Deck in performance. I think that's enough performance as long as it has 12 gigabytes of RAM. And that's even more pessimistic scenario because as long as they do those things, close to a Steam Deck in handheld mode, maybe 30-40% weaker than a Series S in docked mode, but DLSS helps them make up for it. And it has 12 gigabytes of RAM, which remember is more than the Series S. That might make it just tie the Series S. Because Series S is crazy hamstrung. Guys, I think, don't I have that link in the description? If not, I need to add it. Ooh, I'll have to add that later. Let me write that down. AC link. I need to write that down, but I mean, Assassin's Creed Valhalla runs at 720p 60 on the Series S, and that's a 4-year-old game. So if you look up an RTX 2050, it can run 1080p about 50 frames. That's over double the resolution of 720p. So something half the performance of an RTX 2050, like a Switch 2, could probably do 720p 60. So I think people are forgetting how hamstrung the Series S is by its memory system. It's not that I'm saying that its teraflops aren't better than than what's in the Switch 2. It's just its memory system is completely gimped that console long term. So just keep that in mind. If they can do a Series S experience docked and a Steam Deck experience handheld, but in handheld it's half as big and less bulky, I think that works out, Knob. I don't think that's very hard for them to accomplish. I just don't think it is. Um, So that is all of the tipped questions. That is all of the Patreon questions, which I thank those people for writing in. And let's see. Big Boss 69 writes in and says, if you have time, what sort of performance drop off will we see with the RTX 5090 with older PCIe generations? Um, I mean, I think you'll see some real drop-offs, you know. I don't know about 4.0, but going to 3.0, I think you'll start to see at least a 5-10% drop-off in a lot of games. I think so. Um, duh, duh, duh. So let me see here. Shows a history and understanding. Alrighty. So let me see. Final call for questions, people, in either direction. Otherwise, you can probably tell, like I usually do, I was forgetting to breathe at some points because of how excited I am to talk about this stuff. Um, let me see here. Let me see. I bet it has 12. 16 would be too generous. I agree. I think 12 gigabytes for the Switch too. Christian Bittner is probably what they're going to do. I think 12 would work fine too. I mean, it's going to run lower resolutions and settings than the PS5 and Series X. So I honestly do think 12 is enough, you know. Um, let me see. All right, well, I don't know. I think that's going to do it, everybody. I want to thank all of you for watching. Remember, this is sponsored by Micro Center. It's Monitor Madness Month. Mark your calendars. Mark them. March 4th. March 4th. Come back here and use that link in the description to check out their monitor deals. A lot of their stuff's going to be 10% off or more. Also, check out the new store in Charlotte, North Carolina for a free USB. Please click on those links. Check them out if you're looking to buy something. Really, Micros, that helps the channel so much, and they've been pretty good to this channel, to me and Dan. So, check them out. And otherwise, thanks for watching, everybody. Hit the like button, all 1,000 of you. Make sure you're subscribed. That helps the channel a ton. And consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. Vex will be the next guest on Broken Silicon. I will be putting out reader mails for Vex tonight. And if you join for just $2 a month, you can ask the guest questions for the episode coming out next week. So if you're a fan of Vex too, join the Patreon for that as well. All right. Have a good weekend, everybody, and thank you for watching.